Hello and welcome to the new Yankee workshop, Season 2, Episode 2, the Adirondack chair. After a trip to the Museum of the Adirondacks to view a collection of chairs, Norm combines the best features of each chair to make his unique version of an Adirondack chair. He chooses cypress wood because it needs no preservatives or treatment to withstand outdoor conditions. Norm uses the bandsaw to shape the curved pieces and fastens the chair together with screws, nails, nuts, and bolts rather than using fancy joinery. Enjoy!
When you came to the Adirondacks 100 years ago, you came for the summer because it was a long, harsh journey. You might start out on the railroad or come here by stagecoach, and eventually you might get picked up at the local landing by one of these steam-powered launches. Not bad, huh? And finally, here's what we came here to see: Adirondack chairs. Now, there's dozens of them at the museum, and these are just 4 examples. They tell me that they were always painted. But let's look at some of the differences. This one had a curved seat and a 6-slat back. And it's a little unusual because it has this brace right here, which supports not only the arm, but the backrest. The one next to it is very similar, except that there are more slats in the seat. They're narrower. Maybe that's all the lumber they had around when this one was built. This one tends to be a little more unusual. It has a flat bottom, 3 boards on the back, and instead of just a board for a leg, it has actually 4 individual legs connected with a fairly complicated stretcher system. But my favorite is this one right here. It has a slightly curved bottom and arms that are wide and slightly sculpted and a 3-board back. Pretty nice. But I think what I'm going to do first is turn this around and sit down and take in the view before I measure it up. Now I'd like to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your tools. Knowing how to use your tools safely greatly reduces the possibility of personal injury. And remember this: there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. And now I'll show you how I built today's project. Well, here's a version of an Adirondack chair that has some special meaning for me. It's one that my father built about 35 years ago. And he told me that he used just scrap lumber and that the pattern was really just an idea that he had in his mind. Now, it's been painted about 20 times, and it's seen better days. And I think there's a couple improvements that I could make. One is, I think it's too low. And for old knees like these, getting up out of a chair like this is going to be difficult. And the other thing is that the arms are slanted. And if you set anything on it, it's going to want to slide down. So I think we should bring those up. Now, I looked at some store-bought versions like these. This one collapses for storage. I don't know if we need that feature. But what really concerns me is that it's made out of oak. Oak doesn't weather very well, and even with preservative, I think it's going to turn black. Now, they did use some nice brass screws, but overall, I think the chair is just a little bit too narrow. Now, over here is one that's even a little bit better. This one is made out of cypress, so I know it's going to last forever, and it's real nice to work with. Now, what they did is they curved the back like my father's, and they put a big frame on it. They've used stainless steel fasteners, and wherever there were screws or nails, they filled them with some kind of filler. And I'm a little concerned that that might fall out with weathering. It's pretty comfortable, but it tends to sit a little bit low at the back edge, not supporting your back. Now, with all the ideas from all these different chairs, taking the best, I came up with this as being our version of the Adirondack chair. It's made from cypress, so it's going to last forever. And I used galvanized screws and galvanized bolts, and I made no attempt to conceal any of my nails. The only thing that I really did was raise the back of this seat so that it's a little more comfortable. With the curved back, I think it fits today's needs quite well. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this cypress. When I went to the hardwood outlet to get some cypress, he said, "Would you mind using some material that's been previously used?" And I said, no, why? And he showed me this. Nice, clear Cypress. But he said, when you run it through the planer, it might smell a little bit. And I said, why? He said, because it comes from an old brewery. I said, I don't mind at all. So I brought it back here to the shop, and before I could plane it, I had to remove this wax because it's collected a lot of dirt, and it's not good for the planer blade. So I'm just going to use a scraper and remove all that wax. All right, that takes care of the worst of it. Now my stock is about 1 inch thick in the rough, and I want a finished product 3/4 of an inch thick. So I'm going to use my thickness planer, which is just a wheel with a couple blades that turns at a high rate of speed, while a couple other wheels that are rubber feed the wood through the planer. Now I'll take about 1/32 of an inch with each pass, flipping the board until I reach the right thickness. He was right. This stuff did come from a brewery. You know, until you've had the opportunity to work with Cypress, you don't realize how beautiful a wood it is to work with. It saws, planes, and routes perfectly. It's a perfect woodworker's wood, especially for projects like these. Now here are all the pieces that I need for the chair. And they came from 2 8-foot 1x6s, 2 10-foot 1x4s, and a 10-foot piece of 1x3. Now to get started, I want to make these side members right here. So I've developed a pattern like this. I plan on building a lot of these, so we'll just trace the outline on the piece of wood, take it over to the bandsaw, and cut out the curved portions, using a 1/4 inch blade set up in the saw. In order to smooth out the bandsaw cuts, I'm going to use this drum sander attachment in my drill press. Now this one uses ordinary sandpaper, which I cut to size and slip into a little groove. And it's a little less expensive than the kind that uses preformed drums. Now I have to hold the drum off of the table surface to allow it to spin freely. But that means that I can't sand the whole cross section because it's up above the table. So I've added a board which allows me to get the whole surface area. Now I'm ready to attach this front piece to those side members. And I've set it up on the bench over here. And the first thing I'm going to do is pre-drill a hole using this bit, which gives me a countersink for the screw heads. Now for screws, I'm going to use these hot-dipped galvanized screws. They're Phillips head, and they have a coarse thread which holds really well in softwoods like this, and they shouldn't rust. The next piece to make is this back piece right here. It holds the legs together, and it acts as a nailer for the back slats. comes out of a piece of 1x6, and I've laid out the shape from a pattern. I'll cut it on my bandsaw, but I want to save this piece right here because that's going to become this curved slat down at the bottom. Now the only areas that need to be sanded on this piece are the ends, because that's the only place it really shows. Okay, that holds everything together for the next operation, which is to put the vertical legs at the front of the chair. I've put a little mark because the legs hang down 11 3/4 inches below this front piece. And I've made a little template to drill the holes for the carriage bolts. And I'll hold all these things in place using these spring clamps. And I could use C-clamps, but these spring clamps are real handy and they don't take very long to set in place. Okay, make sure it's aligned. Now I'll just drill the holes using a 1/4 inch drill bit. Now with 3 of these 1/4 inch carriage bolts, that joint is not going to go anywhere ever. The next piece to make is this little bracket right here that supports the armrest. I have a template. I'll trace it on some pieces, cut them on the bandsaw, and then smooth out the edges with my drum sander. Okay, that takes care of the brackets. Now I'm ready to make the armrest, and I've traced them from a pattern that I made, and this pattern really incorporates the best of all the chairs we looked at, the width, the curves, and the length. Now I've just rounded over the top edge of my armrest using my router and a 3/8 inch radius rounding over bit. And before I do the second one, I'm going to place it on the bench so that I have the orientation right. Otherwise, I could round over the wrong edge. Now it's really starting to come together now. Now these armrests, I pre-drilled the holes with the same drill bit with the countersink, and I'm using the same all-weather screws as I used before. The next piece that I want to make is this cross member right here. It's a very important piece because it ties the armrest together and it provides backing for the slats. Now if you look at my pattern that I've made, you'll notice that it's cut at an angle, 27.5 degrees. And that's so that I'll have full contact of the slats. And over on the ends here, it's rounded over, but it's at 90 degrees. So before I change the bandsaw to the 27.5 degrees, I'll cut these. Okay, that takes care of the 90-degree cuts. Now I'll tilt my table to 27.5 and make the other cut. Okay, now to smooth out this angled cut, I'm just going to do it freehand, just up against the drum. Well, as before, I'm using some spring clamps, a 1/4-inch hole for a 1/4-inch carriage bolt, and that'll tie the cross member to the arms. Well, with these bolts tightened, I can take off my spring clamps and put in another pair. Okay, well, 2 bolts may look like a lot for these corners, but this is a critical member and I don't want it to rack. Now I'm ready to start working on the slats for the back. These are pieces of 1x4, and how I laid it out originally was I just put pieces on that were longer than I needed, and I took a pencil and kept drawing different designs and arcs until I came up with this one, which I felt the most comfortable with. And now I've transferred those arcs onto these blank pieces, and I'm ready to cut them on the bandsaw. Well, I sure got my money's worth out of my bandsaw today. But if you don't have a bandsaw, there's no reason why you couldn't make all the shapes using a handheld jigsaw. And now I'm ready to smooth out the ends on the drum sander. All right, here all the pieces are laid out in the right orientation, and I've numbered the bottom 1 through 5, and the numbered side will be the face of the back. And I want to round over all the edges using my router with a 1/4-inch rounding over bit. Now, underneath all these pieces is a nice little foam pad, which stops the piece from sliding around as I route it. Now I've taken the slats and pre-drilled a hole at the bottom edge of each one. And I'm going to fasten them to the lower cross member with a screw. And I start in the center, and then each slat will be spaced away from the next one about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, with them screwed in place, I'm ready to align them. The center one is just perfectly centered up and down. You fan the outside ones up against the arms and space the intermediate ones just by eye so they're equally apart, like that. Well, if I've built the chair correctly to this point, the armrest will be perfectly level. And the distance between the edges of the 2 back cross members will be 13 3/4 inches. Now it's kind of hard to measure that and nail at the same time, so I've made a little guide stick or cleat to hold it at the right distance. Now you could use nails or you could use some screws, but screws concern me as a hazard because if the chair is in the sun, they're going to get real hot, and leaning up against that you might get a little burn. So I'm going to use the nails, and I'm going to use a pneumatic nailer with 5-penny galvanized nails. Now at the bottom of the slats I do have one screw in the center, but it will be covered by the seat eventually, and I'm afraid they might cup a little bit with the screw being in the center. So I'm going to put a couple nails at each edge. I'm rounding over the top edges of the seat slats using the same 1/4 inch rounding over bit that I used for the back slats. This is where that scrap from making the bottom nailer comes in handy. It conforms to the curve of the seat, so it makes the first slat for the bottom. I'll just line it up by eye and fasten it with a couple nails in each end. Now for the front slat. That fits between the verticals, and I just want it to hang out about 1/4 inch. Just eye it up and nail that in. The rest of the slats on the bottom get spaced about 1/4 inch. And I've made some little spacers here out of some scrap just to see how it looks before I put the final nails in. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. And now I'm ready to nail those in place. Okay, let's check this out. Ah, that feels pretty good. Well, I suppose I should contemplate some kind of finish for this chair, but you know, considering that this wood came out of a brewery, I don't think it needs much preservative.
Thank you for watching. For more, please like and subscribe.